Well, hi, my name is Ryan Paulson, and I'm the lead pastor here at Emmanuel Faith Community Church. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to invest in a life group, to be part of sharing your life with others and practicing the one another's that we're commanded to practice in Scripture. And so I'm praying for you. I hope that you have a great time with your group as you study the Scriptures and encourage one another and pray together. So this week you're talking about the very first message in Psalm 23. And we're going to be doing 7 weeks in Psalm 23. And this first message was just on that one phrase, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And if you remember, our main point was the identity of our shepherd determines the satisfaction of our soul. So I hope as you were listening to that message, you started to ask the question, who or what is my shepherd? What am I trusting in for protection? What am I trusting in to feed me? What am I trusting in to fill me up? Because every single one of us has a shepherd. The question isn't whether or not you have a shepherd. The question is whether or not your shepherd satisfies. And as St. Augustine said, and I think he was right, that our heart is restless until we find our rest in you, O Lord. So in this short little phrase, we talked about 3 ways that God satisfies as our shepherd, and things that as our shepherd we can trust in for him. Number 1, we said that David refers to God as Yahweh. This is God's name, not just a title. It's not like calling him dad, it's like calling him Ryan, right? So God is Yahweh, which means that he's our covenantal, loving provider. And so we encouraged you, trust in God's goodness. You can trust in God's goodness. We even said that you can't live with God as your shepherd if you don't trust his goodness, because you'll always be second-guessing his intentions. The second thing we said was that we're called to enjoy his presence. David said, "The Lord is," as in right now, "my," as in personal, right? Like he is right now, my, not somebody else's and not might be someday, but he's my shepherd. So one of the things I want to encourage you to do in your life group, I referred to it in the message and it was printed in your bulletin. There are 9 ways that people typically connect with God, ways that they can connect with God. This is a great little book by Gary Thomas where he talks about different ways that the soul lights up and just naturally is wired into people to connect with God. So here's what I'd love for you to do in your life group. Share first the most natural way you connect with God, number 1. But also, would you take it a step further and say, maybe here's one other way to connect with God that I'd like to try this week, and report back next week what one new way you tried to connect with God and just simply how it worked. Because if God is our shepherd, we're invited to enjoy his presence. And the third thing we said is that David ends this little phrase by saying, "I shall not want." As I thought about that before the message and leading up to the message, I thought, well, that's a great idea, but what happens when we want? What happens when we have desires that it doesn't seem like God fulfills? And then I started to think about, wow, we live in a world where we are bombarded with messages. You'll remember that we mentioned during the sermon that some studies would suggest that you and I see roughly 5,000 advertisements every single day. So think about that for a moment. That's a crazy amount of messaging. And they're preying on one of 2 things. They're preying on either your desires, so they want to stir up a desire in you, or they're preying on your fears, because fear sells. Just turn on any news outlet and you'll be reminded of that. And if God is going to be our shepherd, we need to find a way to allow our desires to be met in him. And so the final thing we said, so the first thing was that God is our shepherd and therefore we can trust his goodness, we can enjoy his presence, and that we choose to receive his provision. So maybe a second question that you talk about in your group is, man, my soul gets off kilter either through desire or desires that are stirred or through fears that are perpetuated. And maybe you try to identify one of those ways that your soul gets taken off track and starts to be empty, or starts to be in need, or starts to say, I have wants that maybe aren't being met in Jesus. The invitation that I want to put before you every single week in Psalm 23 is that Psalm 23 wouldn't just be something that we read on our deathbed, but that it would be something that we cover our life in every single day. And so one final encouragement to you and to your groups, I would encourage you, memorize this psalm if you haven't already. And maybe before your feet hit the ground every morning, and maybe before you fall asleep and put your head on the pillow at night, you just recite this great psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. And maybe you just say it 2 times every day and ask God, not just for it to be something you say, but for it to be a covering for your life. So I hope you have a great time talking about this text and this sermon with your group. I'm praying for you and praying that God would not just inform your mind, but transform your soul through this study. God bless you.